I am Andrae Bailey. I am the CEO and founder of an organization called Change Everything. Change Everything is like a B corporation, nonprofit. We do initiatives on homelessness. I do a national initiative on homelessness called Rethinking Homelessness. Work with communities around America on trying to find solutions to the homeless crisis. I was the CEO and president of the Central Florida Commission on Homelessness in this community from 2013 to 2016-ish, 17. I also am the creator of Project Opioid, the founder of Project Opioid, which seeks to bring together leaders on the opioid crisis and examine some of the things we've talked about here playfully as we started the meeting. You know, when I think about any issue that impacts society, I think about, if you look at that top right-hand corner, that any solution that you're really going to find is going to have to come from getting leaders together in any region, geography, national leaders together of all different types, and working on bigger ideas together and bigger solutions towards problems. So that's something I've always sought to do. I'm 43 years old. I've done this 20 years, this type of civic work. Some people call it collective impact. I don't like that name because people use that term to talk about a lot of different things. It's not really philanthropy. It's really not nonprofit. Nonprofit people generally hate the kind of initiatives that I put together because they seek to disrupt the current state to bring solutions. Often a solution is going to be acting differently as a community, believing differently as a community, maybe quitting old programs and starting new programs. Some of the folks that, as Bassa was talking about, this medication-assisted treatment, if you're looking for in this little talk we have any example of how the opioid crisis needs to be solved, and any example of what you need to be good at to be successful in your career as a healthcare professional, use the medication-assisted treatment concept as kind of a framework for that right now. Because, again, we have an opioid crisis. It affects millions of people. And there are medications right now that if we could figure out how to distribute them to scale, we could virtually end the crisis almost overnight. Right? I mean, for all, in the way it looks now. It would look, if we could get medication-assisted...
I would say you would end overdoses overnight. Yeah.
You could end the overdose deaths virtually overnight. I mean, that's it, right? We know how to do it right now. We can do it today. We don't have to come up with something new to do it. We know how to do it, but yet we're not doing it. So this is, again, this is back to you as a healthcare leader. Andrae, you're saying, I'm in a class on the opioid crisis, and we have the answer, and we're not doing it. That's correct. But that is the quandary you face as a healthcare professional across the board. Guys, have any of you looked up lately the stats on obesity in America and where we're headed? Hold on. If you're in, by the way, if you're in here and you say you want to be a part of a healthcare solution, you need to get your head out of Wokeville and out of political correctness and put your head into the obesity crisis. That was unsolicited, and that is for all of you. In 10 years, the modeling on the obesity crisis is unbelievable, where we're headed as a country. Do you think we don't know why that is as a society? Do you think we suffer from lack of information? Right? Like, no. We suffer because we know the right things. Leaders know the right things. But we struggle on how to bring ourselves together as a society and take those whats, combine them with whys, and change people's lives. Last week we had a leadership meeting on the opioid crisis here in our community. Healthcare executives, government officials, top CEOs, I mean, the masters of the universe were in this small room, about 40, 50 leaders. And we brought in a young lady, 35 years old, who told the story of her late husband, who worked in construction, and started taking Oxycontin because of a back injury, and just he had not taken drugs before, he had never, he wasn't an addict, they were just a nice, young, newlywed couple in their 20s in this community. And she talked about this story of this progressing story where he wound up eventually growing a tolerance to Oxycontin, struggling to get that drug legally, and then converting to starting to do illicit opioids, heroin, and then the ultimate, wound up in a place where ultimately he died, overdosed multiple times and died, and in 2017. She said, the two things she said that were just striking were, on the second to last overdose before he died, she was holding him in her arms in their apartment in Orlando, and he looked up, he was overdosing, he looked at her and he said, "This is it, I'm leaving now." And she called 911, she was obviously in hysterics. And the 911 operator said, "Ma'am, if you don't calm down, I'm hanging up on you, disconnecting the call." So and she just said how absolutely paralyzing that was, and how traumatic that was. And then she talked about going to the hospital. He's overdosing, and going to the hospital and pulling up, in the emergency vehicle, and how the hospital treated her, in her words, like she wasn't human. She used the word, "It was the most dehumanizing experience of my life. They treated us like trash, and like we were addicts, like we were losers. And they never as much offered me a pamphlet. They just asked us for our credit card to pay the deductible." And then he left the hospital, and a few months later, he overdosed again, and he died in 2017 in a local hospital in this community. We had her come in. Her name is Nicole. She's going to be telling that story again at an event called Pachakasha in a few weeks. But we had her tell that story because you notice as soon as I tell it, we're here to talk about the opioid crisis, right? Having a conversation, interesting, try to make it fun, try to give you stats. Funny, as soon as I tell that story, the whole vibe of the room changed. All of a sudden, all of you are present with me in the opioid crisis. Welcome to the opioid crisis. Now multiply that in this community times hundreds, multiply it in this community times thousands, and multiply it across America in tens of thousands. This is the opioid crisis. It's a crisis that's killing real people, destroying families, and that you and others like you must solve. This is what you will have to do when you get out of school and you go down the path of your career. But I'll tell you, if you're going to be successful, suddenly when I told that story, many of you were like, that's so unfair. How did that happen to this young man who had no idea he was taking these drugs and what the dangers were, and why didn't they get help when they went to the hospital? And what about this medication-assisted treatment that Asa, the best cook in the class, was talking about? And why didn't he get that help? I sat across from Nicole 3 weeks ago having coffee. She had never really learned about any of the interventions that could have been made available to her late husband. He died, and she never went down these roads. But I was telling her about a drug called buprenorphine that now is a synthetic opioid that can be given to someone like her husband who's having incredible challenges with heroin or with opioids, especially illicit opioids, powerful opioids, fentanyl, this powerful synthetic opioid that's really killing most people in our community, in our state, in our country. And I was telling her that there's now a form of this buprenorphine that can be put into an injectable pellet or a small surgically inserted pellet. Takes about a few minutes to insert it in your arm, and for 6 months you can no longer get high in the traditional sense with an opioid, and it's not possible really to overdose on these drugs. That pellet would have cost her, with her insurance, $50. And I just watched tears come down her eyes. Her husband, late husband, wasn't worth $50, his life. Guys, that's the opioid crisis in America for healthcare professionals. How do we take solutions like medication-assisted treatment, and how do we work to communicate these solutions to leaders inside of hospitals? If I went to one of our local hospitals and I did a private survey of senior leadership, whatever that means, and I said, I want to know, no one's ever going to know the answer to this, what your answers were. I want to know your belief, healthcare leader, executive, on the opioid crisis. What you know and what you think should happen. I guarantee you, because I've seen this done many times, many of senior leaders in your profession that you want to be in would say, yeah, I heard about that MAT stuff, but really these people need to just quit doing drugs, man. It's back to what we believe, our belief system in our society that's more powerful than science and medicine. But this is the challenge that we take on in my organization, Change Everything. But we do that by trying to bring people together, leaders from different walks of life, and then bringing them down a journey towards change of systems, change of public policy, but ultimately, it's a change in belief that any group of people need if they're ever going to be successful. This is America, guys. If you've never studied, this is if I had any piece of advice for leaders your age, what makes American society today, 2020, different than any other civilization, really, that's ever existed in human history, is that we, as a society and as a family of communities, we only do based on what we believe. It doesn't matter money, it doesn't matter any other factor. We will only do what we believe is right to do. The issue of homelessness. So I've worked on homelessness for many, many years, and homelessness is fascinating. Tell people who you are and what you do, just so they know.
Hi, I am Pia Valsori. I work down at the Healthcare Center for the Homeless. I also teach at UCF in the College of Medicine and at Rollins College of MPH students, and have done a lot of work with our street outreach team that Andre's worked closely with on our chronically homeless population, and have been doing some work around this particular issue as well.
Homelessness is fascinating in America. Do you know there's this count we do every year in America. You know how many homeless people we counted last year on the streets in the point time count? 557,000. There are 557,000 Americans, roughly, who sleep outside every night. Like, in the richest country that's ever existed in the history of the world. How does that happen? It happens because we believe wrong and tell ourselves stories that are convenient as a society to allow us to not act and invest to make change. So we did in the work I've done with Healthcare Center for the Homeless, what we find is that communities often, when you poll their leaders, business leaders, faith leaders, elected leaders privately, publicly they say, we got to help the homeless. That's an issue we got to work on. But privately they say, these people need to get a job, man. These people need to pull themselves up by their bootstraps like I did to get my success in life. So we did a study recently, we released this about 2-3 months ago. Our organization did a study where we looked at every person that was panhandling chronically in downtown Orlando. There were 450 homeless individuals we looked at. Of them, 61 were panhandling at a frequency and intensity of 6 hours a day, 6 days a week. And so these are people, how many of you hang out downtown a lot? You see these same homeless people, right? So who are these folks? Are they professional panhandlers? Right? These people need to get a job. They're just milking the system, man. We studied into these 61 people, and what we found was virtually all of them had severe mental illness. Not moderate, severe mental illness, bipolar, schizophrenia, etc. And of the 61, how many of them could become self-sufficient? You know, they need to go to college. Will Smith and The Pursuit of Happiness. You know, they need to go and and make something of themselves. Of the 61, zero had the ability to, because of their mental illness, their physical disabilities, developmental disabilities, 0 were able to be self-sufficient. So what we found is that, again, as a society, we told ourselves a story about these individuals because that story allowed us to leave them in their current condition and never take actions as a society that really could change the issue and make a difference. Guys, this is the opioid crisis. This is most of the issues inside of healthcare, and this is where you guys can be powerful. So we talked about the opioid crisis, how many people are struggling. What is the number you use for the amount of people addicted, dependent to opioids in America?
2.2 million opioid disorder.
Millions. The number ranges only because there's a fine line between dependency and addiction. You know, dependency is you physically are dependent. Addiction is you're physically dependent, but you have these negative societal and personal impacts to yourself. But I think between 2 million and a lot of million people are really struggling with opioids. And communities are struggling to find solutions. When you think about the opioid crisis, is really, you see on the surface all of these overdose deaths, but really the opioid crisis under the surface of the iceberg is unaddressed behavioral health issues, trauma, societal factors, technology, really a breakdown in healthcare. What time are we out here?
I think you're supposed to go until like 11:30.
Okay, so I'll stop in like 20 minutes so you guys can ask questions. But boy, healthcare, again, such a different place. We're at a very different place in 2020 with healthcare. I have an interesting fact. Again, if you're into healthcare, you need to look into. Who saw Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, Quentin Tarantino's movie? So, come on, no Tarantino fans in here? What is wrong with you? If you watch that movie, or any accurately depicted movie from the 60s, 50s, 40s, you notice everyone's smoking, right? I was watching that the other day on an airplane, and I thought, why does Quentin Tarantino have like every scene people are smoking? So I looked up, I was bored, the smoking rates in America. A bell curve. You know how many people smoked in America in 1955? What percentage of adults? 46%. 46% of Americans. 46%. Every other person smokes cigarettes regularly in America. America must have probably smelled very different back then, right? Actually, America smelled like all the clubs downtown, everywhere. Half of Americans, so I was in a traffic jam in Los Angeles 2 weeks ago, and everybody's pissed off and yelling, and I thought, road rage in 2020 is a lot about more cars, but also people don't smoke. People used to sit in cars and be like, this sucks, but at least I got a damn cigarette, you know? But I'm about to go down a very serious road, though. The amount of people in this room who struggle with anxiety, depression, your fellow students at UCF, off the charts. Part of it is technology. I'll tell you right now, social media and our use of technology, there's something very negative about it from a mental health perspective. It is tyrannical. Your human body and your biology was not created. You have X million amount of years of evolution inside of your DNA that was formed for purposes that your biology saw you needed. We needed as a species over a long time. We, up till about 200 years ago, lived in groups of like 80 people. You know, we went to bed when the sun went down. We got outside and worked with our hands. We didn't have 10,000 followers that we didn't know. We didn't feel like our whole life was playing out at any given moment in front of the world. If there's a mass shooting today in Germany, we'll all see that right now. 200 years ago, we didn't even know truth. We didn't even know as a country that there was a mass Holocaust happening. Just so you know, we didn't know until the troops went in after the fall of the German army. There was that level of horror happening, but there was no technology connecting us. I'm telling you, the combination of the technology that all of us have on us at any given moment, and the fact that we don't smoke anymore. By the way, I'm not for smoking. I don't smoke. But if you're stressed out, cigarettes. Anyone in here ever know someone who smoked a long time? I won't ask you to. Cigarettes, nicotine is the greatest thing ever. It's the only drug in the world. I've never smoked before, but it's the only drug in the world that simultaneously gives you energy and calms you. It's great. It smells bad, and it kind of kills you. So, my point though is, every other person here was navigating anxiety in America using nicotine, and there was no pressure, economic pressure. 53% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck now. Every other person now struggles to keep a roof over their head. All of us struggle. So the opioid crisis, I tell you all that because if the opioid crisis is something you want to be a part of fixing, boy, underneath the surface of it, there's really a tremendous amount of issues that have to be dealt with, and trauma, the amount of us that face trauma, unaddressed trauma, mental health issues. If we need to make it cool to get therapy, we need to make it cool in our society to go to counseling. Let me tell you, if you go to counseling, I think that's incredibly woke. If you got a bumper sticker about save the trees, I love it. Great, save some trees. But save yourself first, in my opinion, and start with, by the way, that's not a shot at environmentalists. We're destroying the environment. Probably not a good idea to destroy the environment, for the record. But so many of us, because again, of our belief system, if you had a friend that said, yeah, I'm going to therapy, that's something like, oh my gosh, you okay? You have a disease you're going to give me of the mind? So the idea that we live in a society where the opioid crisis is so prolific, a lot of it has to do with unaddressed behavioral health issues, a healthcare system that is broken, in my opinion, the worst in the world. We have the worst healthcare system in the world because of the amount of money we have. We waste so much money on healthcare, and yet it's unbelievable the amount of money we waste on healthcare. The amount of costs in healthcare for what we deliver to our society. It's not good. But the opioid crisis sits at the top of that, and that's what we see, but these are some of the issues you have to be a part of fixing. So Project Opioid is a statewide collaboration of leaders in Central Florida and around the state of Florida to shape public policy and to look into communities like our community here in Central Florida. We're going to be in Miami, Palm Beach, Fort Lauderdale, Jacksonville, Naples, Tampa, St. Pete in the next few months, and then we're going to be launching this initiative nationally in the fall, creating a community model that can be used to bring leaders together and to have them in their communities and their shape begin working on the opioid crisis. But at the root of it is educating people, especially powerful people, on what solutions we can find to the crisis. And ultimately, reducing opioid abuse and reducing deaths is why we created the initiative. So here's what you can do and what communities can do. Again, if there's one thing I would beg of you, if there's one thing I say that I hope you take with you, it's that if you are someone who wants to really change the world, and oh, by the way, the world needs changing, man. If you're someone here that wants to make the world a better place, you have got to become someone that is good at bringing folks together and competing then in the arena of ideas. Your solution is only as good in this society as your ability to bring people together and compete in the arena of ideas for what the right solution is. So that's what Project Opioid is doing, and that is why we feel like we are going to be successful here and in the state of Florida and beyond. This is what we did for, something I did for California, but this is what it looks like in any community. Helping create structure and bring the right people together is what we lack on so many parts of our society and solutions. And yes, we're doing this in Los Angeles. So. Cool town. Engaging leaders. We have this is interesting. We have a new program we're launching called our CEO, we actually changed it to CORE now, Corporate Opioid Resource and Engagement, where we are using some data, a data analysis. We're looking at, we took 73 data reports and kind of branched them together and kind of looked at where we're at with opioids in general, in our community, in our state. One of the prolific things we found is that the workplace is really a new opportunity to engage folks on the opioid crisis. So everybody come back to me with Nicole, whose husband died. He was taking opioids and got them really through his job. His insurance at his job, he sought opioids. His job paid for the drugs that ultimately killed him. So what if his job, when he was seeking opioids through their HR department and EAP program, educated him? What if 6 months or a year into his opioid use, when he was struggling, what if they were to follow up with him and offer him medication-assisted treatment, behavioral health? There were so many ways to help him in the journey that didn't happen because of how we ultimately look at opioid use, our response to it through a very limited lens. So part of this is super boring, but I find stuff like this so interesting, so I'll be interested for all of us. But this is what we call an opioid risk continuum. If those lines look a little bit messy, it's because I drew this on my iPad sitting in my living room with the colors that you have. So anyway, so here inside, well, outside that green line in any geographic region, this is category 1, which is, imagine people populating all of this. That would be someone who's not using opioids at all. Inside the green, between the green and the yellow, would be someone who's using opioids legally without abuse, like Nicole's husband. He started on opioids, and at one point, actually Nicole said, ugh, this is heartbreaking. Nicole said when he started taking OxyContin, for a period of time, he talked about it being the most life-changing thing in recent times that happened to him. It changed his life for the good at first. He didn't have pain. It helped him think more clearly. Opioids, if you look at the use of opioids in human history, I mean, they found milk of the poppy inside the pharaoh's tombs. I mean, opium is something we have used since the dawn of human history because it has the incredible ability to impact certain parts of the brain for pleasure, reduce pain, but not impact other systems. See, when you die of opioids, it doesn't poison you like you would think. It actually slows the sensors in your brain or blocks the sensors in your brain to where you stop breathing and you suffocate to death. But it doesn't, when you think about, someone's heart stopped, they took an overdose of drugs and it stopped their heart, that's not what opioids do to you. They have such a laser target in how they impact the body that in a way, they're the most amazing drugs ever, especially when you have pain. They just, again, you can't, the big problem with opioids? You cannot take them without growing, the body's smart. It says, oh no, this is a foreign substance. We're going to fight back against this. So you build a tolerance to it that ultimately leads you to take more and more and more opioids, and eventually you wind up dying. But what we're doing is trying to look at where everyone stands on opioids, legally, without abuse, but then you cross that yellow line, you become physically dependent. You cross the red line, now you're overdosing like her husband was overdosing, but he didn't die. He was overdosing. And we were Narcaning him. Everyone know what Narcan is? So Narcan is now saving more lives, really any other drug we've seen in modern history, as far as, especially with overdoses. But ultimately those people go right back to using drugs. So what we've done is created an community opioid risk continuum so that a community creates a strategy with all of where people wind up in mind. The core program would seek to engage companies to try to intervene with someone before they wind up. If you're doing heroin and you get arrested, you burn yourself, anyone, don't raise your hand, but if you've had a friend, a family member, go down a drug road where they're in the criminal justice system, and that's a very hard person to bring back because for a lot of different reasons. So this is us trying to help them in a different way. We're also launching something that you'll see, soft launch in March, hard launch in April. I'm so excited about this. So we're launching this is a new dare. Just say no. Funny, you laugh when I say that. That tells you how successful Just Say No was. So What's the Fix is a new education, awareness, and at some point soon, connectivity campaign that we're doing targeted at Gen Z and millennials around drug use, opioid use disorder. And so it's the new, again, Dare, Just Say No campaign. And we're excited about it. So it launches, you'll see billboards probably in the next 3 to 4 weeks that will say, What's the Fix? And underneath it, it'll say, coming April 19th, 11:59 p.m. Pregnant pause to wait to see who gets the joke. Who got the joke? All right, 420. So the campaign launch, that just was total coincidence. It's not a pro-marijuana campaign, but it is, April, when should we launch it? 420. April 19th, 11:59 p.m. So it's trying to have a new conversation with Gen Z and millennials about drugs, about, like one of the campaigns we're going to do is going to be around just the dangers of the drugs that people are taking. If you have a friend or you wind up doing these drugs and ultimately becoming addicted to them and dying, it usually will be without the proper knowledge of how dangerous the drugs you were taking are. Young people do not get on these drugs because they had a back injury and they went to their doctor. That's some bullshit. That's not true. That's a narrative that applies to many folks who are older. Young people are getting introduced to, bless you, young people are getting introduced to opioids really as recreational party drugs. But then those drugs have incredibly deadly addictive qualities, and fentanyl has made taking opioids Russian roulette of death, man. You take fentanyl, the tiniest amount of fentanyl has the ability to kill you. We had, we took sugar packets, like the kind you get at Starbucks, to put in. The amount of fentanyl in a sugar packet could kill every person in this building 3 times over. That's how powerful fentanyl is. So we're trying to educate people on the dangers of these drugs. We'll have some cool campaigns like the Don't Die Bro campaign. Cinco de Narcan's coming soon. And all kinds of ways of educating folks on drugs. And we're very proud of that. And What's the Fix campaign. Again, this is the average age of someone in Central Florida that dies of overdose to opioids. That's the average age. The largest group is 39 and under, but that's the average age. Something kind of interesting that I can't tell you a lot about because it's very private. So I put it on slides and tell people about it. It's so private. But really, as a healthcare professional, guys, you need to be thinking about how to harness technology to solve healthcare crisis issues. It's not funny, but it makes me laugh. When you think about 68,000 people in Central Florida that are struggling with opioids, that's kind of like a big deal, right? Like how many people have died of COVID-19 in America so far? 2. There's 2 people that have died of opioids, probably in Florida while we've been in this room.
1 in Florida. There's 2 cases right now in Florida.
So not saying we shouldn't worry about COVID-19. Thank you, that's good. So not saying we shouldn't worry about the coronavirus. I'm just saying it's a little bit, again, crazy how we prioritize what's important. The opioid crisis impacting in this community as many people as attend the University of Central Florida. But yet, if I were to show you, we have these groups that are working together, the system we have for finding folks who are struggling and getting them help, it's crazy. It's non-existent. It's abacus and flint rocks. That's what it is. So how do we use technology to connect people? How many of you use Yelp to pick restaurants? Right? I mean, why would you not? Right? It's so stupid. Like, you're going to Charlotte, North Carolina tomorrow on a trip. You roll into downtown Charlotte. You can open your phone and have access to an aggregate of information for thousands of people with experiences that I mean, how often is Yelp wrong when it's got over 1,000 reviews? It's not possible. The answer is it's not possible. It's not possible in an aggregate for technology to be wrong. It's not possible. Now, the chef could have died yesterday, and now you have a different chef. Things change. But technology shapes every part of our society. But in healthcare, and in, by the way, homelessness and these other issues, for some reason we try to, again, replace facts with colloquialism and faulty beliefs, etc. So we're working on a project right now that is very, very, very cool. And the idea is that we are going to we're in the process of partnering with a very large technology company out of Mountain View, California, that you would all know, that I can't tell you their name, and to create a predictive technology that allows us to use search engine inputs to find someone who's struggling with opioids before they know they're struggling. So if you're looking for what's going to change the world over the next 10 years, predictive data is what will change the world. Being able to know something about someone and help them find a solution, healthcare, economics, etc., before they know they need that solution. So in healthcare, Nicole's husband, the gentleman who died, there was this period of time where he was on this path that had solutions, and his life was in tremendous danger, and there were all these intervention points, and nothing was made available. We're working on some technology solutions that would find him, and when he doesn't even know he needs to be found, and said, hey, just so you know, based on your it'll be much fancier than this, but based on what you've put into Google, we feel like we'd like to talk to you about your struggle with opioids. Now, we're not the government, and we're not law enforcement, we're not here to, but we would like to help you if you want help. Click this button, and a person's on the other end of this button right here who will talk to you, totally privacy assured, and we'd like to tell you about how we think your journey ends, and it ends with you dying, but we can help you right now. So this is some solutions we're working on, and then having the leaders who can help. We're actually doing this, I'm actually doing this. We're actually building a homeless solution using technology in California, where you use predictive data to find people, what's called a virtual front door. So how do you use technology on all these different societal problems? Ignore that logo, it doesn't mean anything, that has nothing to do with anything. But analyze and predict and respond. This is where the opioid crisis is headed. Project Seek is what we're calling it. By the way, I'll give you just one little number here. So this technology company was able to go back in reverse and look at people's inputs into their search engine, and what would that have told us back then? You know, economic theory is always perfect in reverse forward, right? So they put in these different inputs, symptoms, treatment, these are different things people would put into their search engine. Out the other side, what they found was that people were searching for solutions to their opioid use disorder at the exact rate they were dying. It's unbelievable. So what you can do, again, with that knowledge, we feel like is pretty amazing. Again, but ultimately, this comes down to leaders working together to find solutions. The opioid crisis, very, 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 if you're in healthcare, it's a crisis that is important. I think there's a lot of videos you can watch on YouTube. There's webinars that tell you about things like medication-assisted treatment. You should definitely understand what buprenorphine is and other medications that are going to need to be expanded greatly in our society in order to help folks with dependency and addiction to opioids. I think understanding behavioral health issues, huge for you as you look at the opioid crisis. But as I mentioned before, your ability to understand as a healthcare professional, and that's what you want to do. You want to run a hospital. I mean, that's your ability to take knowledge and use knowledge with other folks, leaders, other people in your world to drive a solution is the most important thing you could do, the most important set of skills you could learn to change the world around you. And so this little chart here is kind of like this, just kind of an example of some of what Project Opioid is seeking to do. What does it matter if we have the right answers, if we can't move people forward as a society to make those answers available? What is the measure of our success? The reduction of opioid use from an unhealthy standpoint, and opioid deaths. And these are how we do it. So, one of the things we're going to do, I didn't tell you guys this, we're going to study the amount of people that have died of opioids at the University of Central Florida. Shh, don't tell them that yet. But USC, we did a similar conversation with the University of Southern California. When they looked at mysterious deaths of students, UCF students die all the time. They just get a lot of students, people die. The amount of students I would bet you died at the University of Central Florida of opioids is probably a staggering number. And so, those are pieces of information that can be critical because they can drive a conversation to how UCF, our hospitals, our elected leaders can drive solutions. I do want to take questions. We just have a few minutes left, but let me pause and just say here that I encourage you to take time to study into the medical side of the opioid crisis. Just again, medication-assisted treatment, understanding how opioids impact the human body, understanding the overprescription that happened in America and why that happened, understanding right now the lawsuits that are happening with the big pharmaceutical companies. I was told a few weeks ago that there will be over $300 billion ultimately distributed from these pharmaceutical companies back into communities. Guys, that money, a lot of it's going to go to hospitals. What are we going to do with it? Are we going to save lives with that money, or are we going to squander it? There was a lot of money that came down in the big tobacco lawsuits, all those smokers we talked about, but we didn't necessarily spend it wisely, and so how do we not allow that to happen again? But more than anything, I would tell you guys, don't waste your life. Look at the person next to you and say, don't waste it. No, not that person, the other one. Look at them and say, don't waste it. I just want to tell you this, and this is free advice. This is worth what it costs you. In the richest country that's ever existed in the history of the world, and by the way, if you've not taken a little bit of time, take a little time and study your grandfather, your great-great-grandmother, your lineage, all of us as humans. This is crazy, guys. We live in a crazy world. Like the idea of air conditioning. I love talking about air conditioning. So, oh my gosh, I won't go into a building if the air isn't run through a machine to perfectly be placed on my skin, because God forbid I would be in any environment where the air isn't the perfect temperature for me. And right now it could be getting hot out. I'll have to rush to my car and turn the conditioned air back on me because I'll just die if, you know, I don't have that. No, but seriously, like this is, it's great, right? But it's also a little cray. Like the level of what we think is normal in our society and what humans, like fire, like we just have clean water. Like guys, there are things we have in our society that are fantastic, but also it's never existed before in human history. I say that just to tell you this. The greatest thing I would encourage you to do is to reconcile your place in humanity, in your society, and to look at your life and not waste it. Waste your life chasing money and bullshit. You're gonna fall out of bed. You're at UCF, you're gonna fall out of bed and figure out how to make a living. You are. It's not hard to do now for someone like you who's reached this level. And congratulations, you're at a university, you know, you're smart, you're here. The new American dream, in my opinion, is that we can do well for ourselves and we can do good for others. If you have bought into the biggest lie in this country, that chasing money and status is going to make you happy, you're going to join that iceberg of people who turn to substances of all different types because we chase and waste our lives on empty pursuits. But you know what's not an empty pursuit? Spending your life working in healthcare and seeing, as one example, the fruits of your life turn into people who aren't sick, who turn into girls like Nicole who don't bury their husbands. You can work hard every day, and money's easy, but purpose and meaning to your life, that's hard. But you find it, you pursue purpose and meaning with what you do, and there's nothing in the world that can stop you. Because I started this by saying that the opioid crisis isn't about what's, it's about whys, right? But so it is with your life. If I asked you what you want to do, everyone in this room could tell me. But I'm just telling you lovingly, if you can't tell me why, then you have no answers. And this is what your challenge is as a healthcare professional. Not just the what's of healthcare, but the whys in our society that drive us and the meaning of what it means to our lives and to the lives of others around us. That is more powerful than anything in the world. So that's worth what it costs you right there as well. But let me open up in just a few minutes. Any other questions you guys might have? I've thrown a lot at you. I'll answer coronavirus questions, history, philosophy, religion, opioids, whatever you might have.
I don't know if it's a question or a comment. I'm Nigerian and I moved in 2012. And one of the things that I struggle with, because in Nigeria a lot of these drugs are like over the counter. You don't need a prescription to do it. Moving here and then we don't have this kind of issue. So I'm trying to reconcile how is it very accessible in all these countries, but here it's not, and people are going after it. And then, I don't know if you've seen the Netflix show, The Pharmacist.
So I've not seen it yet, but
You
900
need to.
people have told me I have to
It's
watch
really
this.
good. It's really good. Just watching it and how they went through the whole process, and then having people, when they were not able to access opioids anymore, turn to heroin, and that also spikes the rate of that. It's like, I don't know, I'm confused, and I keep asking myself, is it like a societal belief that you need to, you know, or like are people just not tolerant, they have like low tolerance for pain, or feel like they have to turn to something for it to mean something? I don't know.
So you're asking a very complicated question, but the answer, I think, is this. Opioids have always been prolific in societies around the world through human history, and now we've created ways of having even more dangerous synthetic opioids that can be mass produced and put everywhere, and people are going to use them.
The question is, who did you hold accountable? Because at some point I feel like accountability to maybe something. Because now they're going after the pharmacy. Yes, they're very justified in that. They're going after like clinics, or the pill clinics and things like that. That's great. But then what? Because I don't think it's still going to stop.
So this now I'm off fully into what does 10 years from now look like, in my opinion. You're not going to stop the hunger for human beings to take substances. This is again back to the idea of medication-assisted treatment. And the medication-assisted treatments we have right now, I think, are outliers of what the future could hold. I think we can create forms of these receptor blockers that are long-lasting and long-acting. But medicine is the answer. I do not think you're going to regulate people's desire to use drugs like opioids. That's just my opinion. I think you can educate folks. I think you should educate folks, and I think behavioral health. There's a huge conversation in this country and other societies about behavioral health and happiness. Guys, do you know how many people, think about all the people in your world, your age right now, your age. How many of them do you think are happy? How many of them do you think are freaking miserable, right? Like, we have a lot of people who are so miserable, anxiety, depression, they feel like they have no purpose. These drugs are laser targeted at folks and at societies that are in that position. And so I think medicine is going to have to, modern medicine is going to have to be the ultimate solution for the opioid crisis. I don't see us deciding as humans that we suddenly don't like opioids. That's just my opinion, though.
But I also feel maybe the public health side of me feels like it's just kind of changing, mindset changes. I feel like we'll have a long-lasting effect, just changing the mindset.
As Bassa said earlier, the big change in this country, or in others, might be if you're struggling with opioids, your doctor could help you get a prescription that could save your life and help, in theory, build a bridge to another future. That would be, if you know someone who has high blood pressure, do we tell that person to suck it up and to pray to their God for health? No, we tell them to go to the doctor and get blood pressure medication. We need to be looking at these kind of solutions with bigger behavioral health solutions tied to them here and around the world. Humans are going to be humans, though.
Can I answer that?
Yes.
So I think this is a really interesting question you bring up. I think what you're asking actually is about prevention. A lot of this discussion has been about treatment. Someone already has an addiction. What do we do? Prevention is much less studied in a scientific manner. We actually, like, I can tell you right now what, and so can Andre, of what will help someone who has an addiction. Someone who has not yet developed the addiction, to prevent that addiction, that is far less studied. So that is a major area of research. But one thing that needs to occur, but one thing we know, and that was on that iceberg, is that trauma, which, you know, was just kind of mentioned today, but I mean, I see this a lot in the work that I do, and we have a lot of studies showing that there is a very, very, very strong correlation between trauma and substance use. So I don't know how many of you have heard of adverse childhood experiences, one of the best studied theoretical frameworks, but now like really well understood 20 years after the original studies. There are several types of adverse childhood experiences. Domestic violence, you've seen your mother have, you yourself being emotionally abused, physically abused, sexually abused, neglect, homelessness, family member in prison, and so forth. If you have, let's say, 7 out of these, then we know there's a 4,000 times higher risk of you becoming an injection drug user. So historically, we thought a lot about prevention as dare, right? Let's just tell you drugs are bad. But if you go to someone who has a history of adverse childhood experiences, what we're now learning is their brain does not function the way someone who doesn't have that history. Their neural networks, their dopamine creation is already different. You then hand someone an opioid, that may be the first time in their lives that they actually feel good, because their neural networks were basically shot by a history of adverse childhood experiences. So, I mean, to me, the biggest question on the prevention side, I don't do much research on this. I think it's a lot harder. Maybe that's why I don't do the research on it, I don't know. But to me, the biggest question is, how do you prevent early childhood experiences that are traumatic? And then once those occur, how do you address those? Is it in the school system? Is it, like Andre was saying, counseling for everyone? I don't know, but what we do know really well now is that there is a really tight connection, and in certain areas like the criminal justice system, it's like 90% of the people in there have a history of trauma who also have a substance use issue. I mean, it is just mind-blowing. I think
Yeah.
it's terrifying, but I don't know what to do about it, and I think that's also the future.
Well, I
The-
think another important point is you're talking about in Kenya that opioids are over the counter. And one of the things that we saw when we did our data study is that what's killing people, people are overdosing on now are not opioids. They're not what you would buy over the counter. It's when people were cut off from their opioids, they turn to street drugs that have fentanyl in them. So fentanyl is now the number one drug overdose. It surpassed cocaine last year. And so getting correctly manufactured opioids, you can live off of, you can do that for a long time. When they take them away and you move to something, then you get fentanyl, then you get heroin, and that's really where we've seen a lot of the overdoses.
The future of these conversations, though, is this, though, is we just look at all these things wrong, though. Like we don't find solutions because we look at them wrong. Like, so I told you earlier that behavior modification doesn't work, right? And so you would say, well, Bassa was just saying we need to have behavior modification. No. Bassa was saying we need to have brain modification. But that's super scary and not something that we want to talk about in our society. So this is where the next generation of healthcare professionals learn about everything that we're doing right now in healthcare. Study, the Affordable Care Act. Study Medicaid for all. Study, the human body. Understand everything we're doing right now in healthcare from the broadest perspective, and then look at those your age and with those who have 20, 30, 40, 50 years that they can work on healthcare. And look up at people my age and older and be like, yeah, they are full of shit. Because, by the way, we have effed up healthcare in this country with all the money in the world, the richest country that's ever existed in the history of the world, and we still don't know how to give people counseling. It's so ridiculous. But it's gonna, we have solutions like medications that cost $1 to not have you overdose, and we can't get it to you. Take that to heart, and don't let people like me and people who are, I'm not trying to use age here, but it's an easy way to make the point I'm making. Don't just do what we've done on healthcare, because we have broken it because we've refused to ask tough questions and to try to work to make real solutions. We must figure out how to change our beliefs when it comes to mental health and trauma. And the reason it's not available is because we have a stigma towards it. My friend's going to counseling. She struggled with X, Y, and Z in her family. She shouldn't tell people about that. Keep that to yourself. But what we find is these traumas rewire the brain. And until we learn as a society to reconnect someone's brain and then see the correlation between that and their decision making, we're going to struggle endlessly. But this is the next generation of solutions for leaders like yourself. So thinking of these things differently. Kendall, last questions. I know we have to go soon. I'm sorry, you have a question here.
The injectable that you were saying, or the something that we insert and it keeps you after for dependency they're on for 6 months. Are they offered in the rehab center or not?
So, kinda. So again, the answer is technically yes, but a lot of the rehab centers, you see a billboard, call this number, and we're going to take you to Shady Acres Horse Riding Center for 6 weeks to overcome your addiction, right? Where the rehab centers are really a market in this country. By the way, I have a master's degree in divinity and, a 1-year certification from Crummer. You can't out-conservative me, okay? Like, give it a shot. But I'm just telling you this, capitalism is deeply flawed in our society right now. Capitalism applied to every part of our society. We would not be here, by the way, Nigeria, I think, as an example. Anyone who says we're going to tear down capitalism, so capitalism on its own has lifted 50% of the world's population out of poverty. The free markets have over the last decade. One of the stories that is not told, but not nonprofits and NGOs, economic development has been an incredible, incredible force in this world for good. The problem is, like everything, it has its flaws. And capitalism in the healthcare system, pharmacies and pharmaceutical companies that are profit-driven when it comes to opioids, you just have to, at universities, I think it costs a little too much to go to college, in my opinion. I'm sorry, no. I think the
We're
university.
48th cheapest in the nation, so.
No, UCF's great. UCF's great. But I'm telling you right now, from a capitalist, you know,
They're
from a capitalist, capitalism as a philosophy is showing its cracks right now in society. So how do you, as healthcare leaders, find ways to still be profitable in the institutions that you run, but have purpose and people first? And that's again, and the reason these drugs are not available is because behavioral health centers make a lot of money cycling people through bullshit programs that don't work. So I'm going to give you a different answer, but that's the truth. There's a lot of people making a lot of money off people addicted to drugs and dying of drugs. Right? So how do you as leaders, how do we take that and figure out how to mitigate and find solutions that that still are economically sound, but have the ability to cause transformation? And more than anything, the most impactful moment of this class, and I'm going to end, in my opinion, is when we went from policy, opioid crisis, state leaders, and I told you Nicole's story. I told you the story of a woman in her 20s in your community. Her name's Nicole. Her name is Nicole. Her husband's name was Bill. Nicole and Bill lost their marriage, and Bill lost his life because these things were not available to him, and we had not solved these problems. If it's about politics, if it's about policy, if it's about problems as a society, we don't do anything because we just figure out how to tell ourselves a story that allows us to not act. But when it's about people, figuring out how to keep the stories of people front of mind, figuring out how to tell the story of what it looks like when someone's in better health, figuring out how to show the results of inaction. In your world, there's really nothing more powerful than that. So thank you guys for having me here today, and Dr. Ward can get you information on everything we're doing, and don't be someone who take your wokeness and apply it to solving life's problems, starting with your own, and you can be someone who changes the world. So thanks for having me in.
Thank you very much.